Welcome to the 5th episode of Our World of Norm Busigu. Now, the premise of this show is quite simple. I'm going to report on and explore important topics affecting real people like you and me. Now, within this, there are two aims. Firstly, to have a positive social impact, and secondly, to inform. In this episode, I'll be exploring the brain drain in Africa. This being the phenomenon that the best and brightest minds, and also ones of potential, are leaving the continent in large numbers and not returning. Now, this is an issue which has plagued Africa for decades. However, we are really beginning to see the negative impacts of this take effect in modern times. Now, as a member of the African diaspora and of the younger generation, I believe there are serious questions that can be raised, such as what will the state of Africa be in decades to come, and what urgent action needs to be taken now to reverse the impacts of this trend, or at least mitigate them. These are the themes that I'll be discussing in this episode, so stay tuned because you don't want to miss this. Now, my reasons for wanting to make this episode are quite personal and deep-rooted. I first came across this concept of the brain drain while completing a series of international legal internships in Africa during my time in law school. In Uganda, I worked with the African Prisons Project, and while within their Access to Justice team, I taught prison inmates, some of whom were on death row, and prison staff, contract and criminal law, and also the essentials of advocacy. While in Ghana, Accra, I worked with the National Legal Aid Scheme, and while working alongside governmental lawyers, I helped to provide legal advice to Ghanaian citizens. Now, across both those experiences, working alongside African lawyers and legal volunteers, they really highlighted their concerns with respect to the brain drain in Africa, and how it really has created this gap in the market with respect to skilled workers in the professional sector. So, for example, there being a lack of lawyers or doctors, for example, but also how they champion individuals like myself who had come back, members of the diaspora who had chosen to go back to lend their skills and time to help. And so this phrase of Norman, come back, you are most welcome, come back home, is something that I heard so frequently. And so this idea of the brain drain is something that I've held on to for a long time and knew I wanted to speak on, and also to spread a message to other members of the diaspora. A belief that there's almost a silent duty I believe that we all have to help the continent in some way, shape or form. And so with that being said, let's really get into this episode. The brain drain can be defined as the emigration of skilled nationals, which results in the depletion of skilled human resource in the countries of origin. A report by the International Monetary Fund in 2016 found that the brain drain is particularly severe in sub-Saharan Africa, a region where human capital is scarce, and brain drain impact is greatly felt due to the migration of the young and educated workers. However, it is important to note that the brain drain in Africa is not a new phenomenon. It had already begun in the 1960s. According to a World Bank report in 2014, African migrants have doubled between 1980 and 2010, reaching 30.6 million. This represents around 3% of the continent's total population. Now, the brain drain in Africa has origins dating back to the 1960s. Africans began to migrate abroad to former colonial powers such as the UK to study. The incentive behind this was that the newly formed African nations wanted to possess their own skilled elite class of professionals. And so the idea was that these individuals would study abroad, come back and help to develop their countries. They were incentivized by means such as attractive job prospects upon return, and also by patriotic sloganeering. Things to the effect of, your country needs you and come back home. Things of that nature. By the 1980s, however, a growing decline in post-independence euphoria, coupled with growing globalization, have resulted in something of a disenfranchisement that Africans who had left had with the continent. There was this growing idea that the governments and leaders in power were not going to be able to solve the issues facing the common African. So, for example, lack of opportunity and also dealing with poverty. And so, couple this with the fact that there was a growing decline in recruitment for public sector-based roles. So we begin to really, from the 1980s, see this shift from temporary migration to permanent migration. And this is the phenomenon that we are seeing today. According to a January 2014 World Bank report, African migrants have doubled between 1980 and 2010, reaching 30.6 million. This represents around 3% of the continent's total population. As of 2018, it was estimated that approximately 60% of Africa's youth was aged below that of 25 years, making Africa's population, technically speaking, the youngest in the world by age. Now, the Africa Union Youth Charter asserts that Africa's youth remains its most valuable asset. Now, at this point, it's worth considering some facts. So approximately 10 to 12 million young Africans enter into the labour force in Africa every year. However, only 3 million jobs are created across the continent annually each year. And so we're already beginning to see this imbalance that exists between the opportunities that are present and the numbers that are fighting for them. Also, between the years of 2000 and 2014, it was estimated that employment only expanded by 1.8% each year. And as a result of all of these facts, it's becoming very clear and understandable why many Africans and young Africans are having to migrate abroad as a means of sourcing economic opportunity and also as a way of creating a better future for themselves, it would seem at this moment in time. The African Union estimates that about 70,000 skilled professionals emigrate from Africa every year. This is resulting in the depletion of the continent's skilled manpower. We can particularly observe the impacts of the brain drain with respect to public services, namely healthcare. Large parts of sub-Saharan Africa have effectively no healthcare at all, with only 600,000 healthcare workers for a population of 682 million. According to the World Health Organization data, Uganda has less than 5,000 doctors for a population topping 35 million people. Annually, it is estimated that Africa loses around 2 billion through the brain drain in the health sector alone. Destination countries do not pay for the cost of training African doctors they recruit. For instance, 1 in 10 doctors working in the UK comes from Africa, allowing the UK to save on average 2.7 billion on training costs. Now at this stage, it seems that the brain drain in Africa is something that governments in Africa are struggling to deal with. It seems that it's impossible to reverse this trend and that strategies to make individuals return back home aren't effective. So at this stage, it's worth us considering. What are the barriers in the minds of those that have migrated that are preventing them from returning home? Well, there are 3 factors that I think that we should give consideration to. The first is political apathy. The Ibrahim Forum report found previously that 60% of Africans believe that the governments weren't effective in dealing with the issues faced by young people. And this is important because when thinking about political apathy, if there's this idea in the minds of individuals that the governments or leaders can't deal with the issues faced by the common man, then this is arguably more likely to make them want to migrate abroad, to find better opportunities and to source a better life for themselves. The second factor is finances. It can be said that a lack of finances is the biggest and most prevalent factor with respect to deprivation facing Africans on the continent. Data by the World Bank in 2019 found that less than 1/5 of young Africans received wages that year. Less than 1/5. Think about that. And lastly, market saturation. In the context of business, it can be said that Asians in particular and other exporters have not only penetrated markets in sub-Saharan Africa, but they've also begun to dominate them. And this is making it quite difficult for Africans, not only in the continent, but also in the diaspora, to consider coming back to Africa and actually setting up their own businesses or trying to penetrate particular sectors themselves. And so it's these 3 factors which arguably are worth considering with respect to why individuals are not returning back home. So, having discussed the origins of the brain drain, the current state of play, and potential barriers that exist that prevent individuals from returning to the continent, I think it's worth us concluding with some potential solutions to help mitigate the impacts of the brain drain or even potentially reverse them. Here are some things that I think we should consider. Now, the first thing that I think we should consider as a solution is greater youth involvement in political processes. The Now Generation Forum asserts that youth should be given greater involvement in political processes moving forward. And I believe this is a great solution not only to the brain drain, but also to help combating issues of political apathy that I mentioned earlier. As the old guard and powers that be begin to transition on from power and also move on from this lifetime, I think it's really important with respect to long-term development and growth on the continent that individuals from my generation are given greater involvement in leadership and political processes. This is something that ex-President Obama echoed on a trip to South Africa previously. And he asserted that if greater opportunities and platforms are created for young Africans, then you'll not only see a decline in the African brain drain, but potentially it's reversing. And the final factor worth considering is brain circulation. So currently we see brain drain, which is individuals leaving the continent. Brain circulation would see those individuals and those members of the diaspora, such as myself, going back to the continent to use their skills and networks to help plug those gaps in professional services by using their skills and networks. Now, I believe this is a very practical means to help combat the brain drain, and in time can help again reverse the impacts of it that we have been seeing. But I think there's more of a responsibility on African leaders and governments to encourage individuals from the diaspora to come back and to help the continent grow and develop and help them really see their importance in this battle to help the continent develop over time. And that concludes episode 5 of Our World with Norm Busigu. In this episode, I've explored the brain drain in Africa, this being the concept and the phenomenon that young minds and the best and brightest are leaving the continent in large numbers and not returning. This is an issue that we've seen play out for decades now. However, we are really seeing the negative impacts play out in real time now. But can you really blame those individuals for leaving the continent? What with the lack of the socio-economic opportunity and also the political apathy that is present with those on the continent. But with all these issues having been laid out throughout this episode, the question now turns to, how do we get those young minds back? And how do we get members of the diaspora, such as myself, to go back, to use their skills, their networks, and their abilities to help the continent develop and grow over time? These are things that I've also explored in this episode, and we can only hope that over time, we continue to see the growth and development of this beautiful continent. Until the next time, stay safe and stay blessed.